So, with Dragon Age the Veilguard, there have been a lot of attempts, in my opinion, to convince the general public that this game is something that it really isn't, to convince you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears, what you've been seeing in trailers and previews, and believe that the Dragon Age DNA in Veilguard, specifically its gameplay, is anything more than a very thin coat of paint. And as someone who played the game for about 7 hours a few weeks ago, well, I guess my thesis statement here is that it isn't. A thin coat of paint is more or less exactly what Veilguard has to offer longtime fans, and any serious, level-headed discussion about this game is completely hampered by what seems to be an almost universal refusal to just say that out loud. Before I get to what I mean by that, and I think you're gonna want to hear it as this has been a tough video to make as a once very big fan of these games, but before we get there, I do need to take a really quick second to first thank the sponsor of today's video, New World Aeternum, which is available now on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, and PC. If you don't know, New World Aeternum is a brand new action RPG set on the supernatural island of Aeternum. I've been playing the game for the past 3 days straight. I have about 30 hours into it already, and what I can say is that if you're looking for a new RPG, especially an action RPG to sink your teeth into, well, this is the one. Aeternum's real-time action combat is so fun. Swords, guns, and magic is a winning combo in my book, and I would assume anyone's book. You can play solo or co-op, the game has crossplay too, and Aeternum offers a massive, beautiful world filled to the brim with quests that, at least in the early game, have had a 100% hit rate for me. I am going to continue playing this one long after this sponsored segment goes up, and if you're interested, I've left a link in the description to check New World Aeternum out, because, again, the game is available right now on PC, Xbox Series X and S, and PS5. Now, for really quick context on how I had the chance to play Dragon Age the Veilguard, EA were nice enough to invite me to check it out, which I did very much appreciate. I'm a big-time Dragon Age fan, and if you look at the other games I cover and tend to love on this channel, it sure fits right in, but I left the Veilguard recording event with a small pit in my stomach, because I knew that the honest way I would describe this game would be about the last thing most Dragon Age fans would want to hear. Now, I don't say that from a I had a terrible time and the game has no redeeming qualities perspective, but instead from, well, you know what? Here's a good way to put it. My prediction is that there are going to be 2 games that Veilguard will constantly be compared to, one in terms of gameplay and the other for tone. On the gameplay side of things, well, if you haven't been able to tell by just, using your eyeballs, Veilguard's combat and exploration is full-blown, or at least 85% blown, God of War 2018 worship. This new Dragon Age is all about the action, building up a rage meter to release an ultimate, getting your perfect parries in, shield throws, talismans that activate special abilities, plenty of pots to break and chests to open, you get it. Point is, somebody really liked God of War 2018 and said, why don't we just do that and be done with it? Now, that's not all there is to say about combat, don't worry, we still need to get to where that thin coat of paint even comes into play, but the other comparison I think people will constantly make, this time in terms of the game's tone, is to that Guardians of the Galaxy game from a few years ago, and this is the point of the video where some of you recoil in horror and maybe projectile vomit, but it's also the point where at least some of you are probably thinking, hey, those are 2 not bad at all games, you could do much worse in terms of comparisons, and yeah, if you're thinking that, I completely agree. In fact, I'd go as far as to say God of War 2018 is a great game, I loved it. However, the reason I even bring those 2 games up, and the comparisons to Veilguard I'm sure are going to be out there, is this. Imagine if 6 months ago, we don't have to go very far back, only before that initial reveal trailer, but imagine if 6 months ago you, or even better, some imaginary person, let's say, had gone to the Dragon Age community on Twitter, Reddit, wherever, and said that what you wanted out of the upcoming Dragon Age, which at that point had only been teased, was God of War, action above all else, hack away at your enemy's combat, combined with a story matching the tone of the Guardians of the Galaxy game. Now, I don't care what kind of Dragon Age fan you are, whether you're an Origins-only type of person, or you started with Inquisition, or maybe you're like me and find things to enjoy in all 3 games, whatever the case may be, there is no denying that the Dragon Age fanbase of just 6 months ago would have torn that imaginary person apart for merely suggesting such a thing. Yet ultimately, that's the type of game BioWare have made here, and that's why I left my play session with Veilguard having that pit in my stomach. Not because what I played was the worst thing ever or because it didn't have redeeming qualities. I mean, I could have said Veilguard is like the story of Gollum combined with the gameplay of, well, just Gollum again, but I didn't. No, I felt the way I did because I knew that what I had just played for 7 hours was far from what most Dragon Age fans had been asking for, and I think BioWare have put themselves in a let's say, an interesting spot here, because the game they've made is absolutely going to put the existing Dragon Age fanbase through a pretty fine strainer, and the question is, what percentage of the fanbase is coming out the other side of that still wanting to buy Veilguard? They've tried to make a very palatable game here that could appeal to everyone instead of, directly targeting their own fan base and hopefully breaking out from there, the ideal approach in my opinion. But that said, this is the type of game where once it's out, the people who end up enjoying it for what it is, and that's a phrase I want to return to in a minute, for what it is, but those players are absolutely going to end up saying things like, hey, it's a good game, it's just not a good Dragon Age game. I mean, I can see the comments already, I'm sure you can too, and I bet before I even finished that sentence, you knew where it was going. That's the thing though, Veilguard as a quippy action-adventure is trying pretty hard at times and has its moments. It's just that a quip-filled action game is not what most Dragon Age fans were asking for, and in my opinion, you can't put any blame on the fans who feel like this is just not what they signed up for. Anyway, that sums up my thoughts on the general direction BioWare have chosen to take with Veilguard, and now I want to shift into my not particularly happy thoughts on one other specific part of the game, and also I'd like to talk about the combat and writing through that for what it is lens. I will say that if you're hoping for a bunch of character creator talk at some point, maybe my ranking of the top 50 eyebrow colors in Dragon Age the Veilguard, well, I'm sorry, but I spent like 3.5 minutes making my guy, and while it may be shocking that I didn't spend an hour and a half carefully adjusting my character's bulge size, I had good reason for it. I rushed a bit through the visual side of character creation because I wanted to get to something I was pretty excited for, something BioWare have been talking about openly for months now, the Set Your Past Adventure screen before the opening mission, which apparently would let you import your choices from previous games. If you're a Dragon Age fan, you know that has always been something that set the Dragon Age games apart, the respect for your Thetis and your choices from game to game, and, well, what I'll say here is that I was incredibly disappointed when I found out that Veilguard allows you to import a grand total of, wait for it, 0 choices from Origins, 0 choices from Dragon Age 2, and just 3 from Inquisition, the game that Veilguard is a direct sequel to. If you want to know which 3 specifically, if you don't, skip forward like 15 seconds, but the only things you can set are who your Inquisitor romanced, and then the 2 choices from the very end of the Trespasser DLC, whether the Inquisition was disbanded and whether you vowed to stop Solus. So really, story-wise, all that matters are the last 5 minutes of Inquisition's DLC, and everything else across the trilogy that had choices Veilguard will just have to avoid mentioning, because, as they told us at the event, in cases where they don't know what we did, they just avoided those subjects or referenced them vaguely so nothing was directly contradicted or too confusing to newcomers. And BioWare are doing this very strange thing with Veilguard, where on one hand, it's a direct sequel with a bunch of returning characters in prominent roles, yet on the other, it's a borderline soft reboot trying to minimize every direct tie to the past in an attempt to, I guess, avoid scaring off non-Dragon Age fans. And to me, this whole past choices situation is yet another example of Veilguard taking something that once made Dragon Age really stand out from the crowd and reducing it to a shell of itself, which is a shame. I mean, say what you will about Dragon Age 2, for example, but that game was notoriously rushed. BioWare had to throw it together in like a year, yet guess what? It still managed to account for almost 20 choices from the game that preceded it, while still telling its own story. I just think BioWare could have and should have done a lot better than 3 choices total. This game has been in development forever, and to be clear, it's not that I was crossing my fingers hoping for forced cameos and shoehorned callbacks where Veilguard winks at me just for the sake of invoking nostalgia, but the appearances of certain returning characters are going to feel pretty hollow now, knowing that they don't know their own past, and knowing that Veilguard is going to have to awkwardly dance around certain subjects because of it. Oh, also, before we get to the for what it is conversation, I am now realizing that I've yet to comment on the whole art style thing, but honestly, there's a really good reason for that, because what else is there to say, exactly? Everyone's talked about it already, and if you know my channel, you know I'm not the type to turn a 2-sentence topic into a 10-minute video, so in short, yes, the game looks cartoony, the less that's said about the Qunari the better, and sure, all the main characters have massive heads for some reason, like someone spent a little too much time admiring their Funko Pop collection before designing them. There's no doubt that art direction is super important, but this specific dead horse has been beaten into a fine paste, and there's just nothing new for me to add to the conversation. What I'd actually like to quickly talk about though is, well, if you're willing to jump through approximately 37 hoops for Dragon Age the Veilguard, how is it as a fairly lighthearted, very linear feeling action-adventure soft reboot, which hey, if you're physically recoiling at that description for a Dragon Age game, again, I get it, and I also understand if your interest in Veilguard died at Hoop 4 or Hoop 9 or Hoop 27, but hey, I don't have any skin in this game. If you can't tell at this point that I'm being completely blunt and honest in this video as a longtime fan of these games, well, I don't know what to tell you. I just want this to be a useful impressions video where no words are minced and you can really walk away feeling like you got the full picture. And in saying that, I think it's interesting, for the sake of conversation, to go, okay, taking the premise of Veilguard being a kinda whimsical action game, is it at least a good kinda whimsical action game? I mean, I like some action games, and I don't hate lighthearted things as a concept. I mean, that's not really something I wanted for Veilguard, but that's the point. For what it is, how is it? The answer is, well, obviously through that lens, parts of Veilguard are way easier to look at in a positive light. Some things, like certain enemy designs, are awful whether you're comparing them to previous games or not, but there were parts of Veilguard that I did like. First and foremost, and honestly this is first by a huge margin, I really enjoyed the starting companions you meet right at the beginning of the game. Harding returns from Inquisition, I liked her there, also liked her in Veilguard, maybe even more, although I am assuming at some point they're going to introduce a plotline where she gets kicked in the head by a horse or something and just, forgets about what happened in the last game, so it can't ever be referenced. Sorry, I'll let it go now, this is supposed to be the For What It Is section. I also liked Nev. I'd describe her as BioWare's attempt at a Yennefer type. She's a very cynical sorceress, or not sorceress, mage, that's very to the point, down to business when there's work to do, but when you talk to her behind closed doors, there's obviously way more to her. The opening also has Varric involved, of course another returning character, and while I won't say how much he is or isn't involved in the rest of the game, kind of a spoiler, I was happy that he still felt like Varric to me, just an older one who isn't really fazed by anything because at this point he's seen it all. After the opening companions though, it's more complicated, at least for me. 3 of them I had very little time with, but the other 2 I actually could form an opinion on were Lucanus and Bellara. Bellara didn't really work for me at all. She's the quirky one, and I'll leave it at that. And Lucanus, well, in my opinion, the premise of his character, there's something underneath the surface with him I won't spoil, but I felt the entire premise of this guy suffered quite a lot from Veilguard sanding the edges off of certain things. I haven't been saying Veilguard has a light, breezy tone just for the fun of it. I mean, in my 7 hours of playing the game, there was really only one 10-minute sequence that I'd describe as being remotely dark, tonally. This is not a spoiler, but in Bellara's introductory quest, there was a small section of it where you come across a village that's been overrun by blight. Many innocents had died, and it was reasonably atmospheric, although I did almost groan when in the space of 15 seconds the game hit me with a, "It's quiet. Too quiet," immediately followed by, "This barricade, was it built to keep something out?" Pause for dramatic effect. "No, to keep something in." I mean, if you're gonna hit me with lines like that, I feel like you really gotta space them out, give me some distance between the cliches, but hey, that's a nitpick. Anyway though, my point is that I would bet if you go around to other previews from people who also played Veilguard, if they mention that the game can be dark at times, they're gonna use footage from that one 10-minute sequence because it's really the only example from 7 hours of playing, other than, I guess there was a boss fight we couldn't record that visually at least was dark, a boss fight I really liked actually. But back to companion talk, I would say the companions I mentioned positively were by far the most interesting thing to me about Veilguard. I really liked the conversations you could have with them back at the lighthouse, which is your base of operations in this game, and I always like the idea of approval-disapproval systems in games, which Veilguard has with the choices you make and your companions' reactions to those choices. As far as the choices themselves, well, before I say anything else, know that Veilguard is a very linear game, or at least it feels that way 99% of the time. Sure, from the lighthouse base of operations, you can decide what mission you want to do. I don't believe things are all forced in a specific order, but ultimately, once you're doing a mission, which is what you're going to be doing most of the time, you're being funneled down a set path with little offshoots here and there to find some gear or an optional enemy, maybe. There's not much player freedom in that regard, but what have the potential to make things interesting are the choices. In my 7 hours, most of the decisions I got to make were pretty small in terms of scale, but one of the decisions was extremely interesting, at least as a concept. I won't spoil it, but what I'll say is that I couldn't exaggerate the scale of what we had the option to do if I tried. And if, big if, that choice affects the rest of your playthrough and compounds with other choices like it, well, that could be really interesting, but unfortunately could is all I can really say until the full game is out. Anyway, I think a good place to wrap this video up would be some quick closing thoughts on the combat. And also, by the way, if you've enjoyed this video and this kind of coverage, I try to be fair but very honest and upfront, then consider leaving a like as it really helps my content get out there, and consider subscribing if you want. I'll never spam you 1 or 2 videos, I probably spend way more time on than necessary each month. Now, what I think is interesting about taking Veilguard's combat for what it is that when I walked into my time with the game, just like with the art direction, I was already well aware of what Veilguard's combat looked like, so my expectations were at post having seen the trailer levels. I mean, we all have eyes, we've all seen those trailers, so when I sat down to play Veilguard, the flashy action combat with way too much happening on screen at times was not a shock, it was expected. It was also not a surprise to see that you can't take full control of your companions anymore and can only call in abilities, because I'd already long since gone through the, wow, I really don't like that process when the first gameplay trailer dropped. The best I was hoping for, knowing everything I already did, was some dumb fun. I was going to be playing for 7 hours that day either way, and you know what? I got my dumb fun. Was it the best action game I've ever played? No, but I had a good enough time with Veilguard's combat that it met, or, I'd say exceeded my post having seen the trailer's expectations. It controlled well, the perfect parry was very satisfying, and it helped that throughout the day we were being switched between the 3 different classes of Rogue, Mage, and Warrior, and within those classes you can respec to different builds whenever you want. That obviously kept things really fresh, and with the UI toned down in the settings, I even felt like the "there's too much going on" effect was mostly fixed. Unfortunately, I don't have that footage because we weren't allowed to record much past the first 2 sections of the game where I hadn't turned the UI off yet, but it is what it is. Anyway, I think that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope this came off as fair. I don't post a lot, I don't rely on early access for this channel to survive, my evidence being, well, 95% of the content I post, so when I go to play a game early like this, my only incentive is to come back and be honest about games I already had a serious interest in. Later this month, I still plan on reviewing Veilguard for you guys because I want to see how certain choices play out too, and while I'm disappointed, very disappointed actually, in the general direction of the game, I'm at least going to review it. I think that'll be worthwhile. That said, thank you so much for watching, thank you to Luality for borrowing me some Rogue footage because I didn't record any, and thanks to EA and BioWare for inviting me to check the game out early. I should have another video for you early next week, which is a very quick turnaround for me, so see you then.